In the glittering world of wealth and privilege, where fortunes are made and broken as swiftly as hearts, a scandal erupted that sent shockwaves through elite circles and tabloid headlines alike. At the center of this tempest was Victor Langston, a self-made millionaire whose tech empire had catapulted him from obscurity to the upper echelons of society. At 42, Victor was the epitome of success. A chiseled jawline, a wardrobe of bespoke suits, and a sprawling Manhattan penthouse that overlooked Central Park. His life, meticulously curated for public admiration, seemed unassailable, until the moment he announced his divorce from his pregnant wife, Elise, for a yoga teacher named Serafina Voss. The twist that no one saw coming. Serafina was no ordinary yoga instructor. She was, in fact, the long-estranged heir to the Voss Airline Dynasty, a fortune that dwarfed even Victor's considerable wealth. Elise Langston, 35, was the picture of grace and resilience. A former pediatric nurse who had given up her career to support Victor's ambitions, she was 6 months pregnant with their first child when the news broke. Their marriage, once a fairy tale of mutual devotion, had begun to fray under the weight of Victor's relentless pursuit of power. Elise had been his anchor, the soft-spoken confidant who balanced his intensity with warmth. They had met a decade earlier at a charity gala, where her quiet strength and compassion stood out in a sea of calculated charm. Victor, then a rising star in Silicon Valley, was captivated by her authenticity. Their courtship was whirlwind, 6 months of stolen weekends and late-night conversations about dreams and legacy. They married in a lavish ceremony on a private island, surrounded by A-listers and industry titans, with Elise radiant in a gown that cost more than most people's homes. For years, their life together seemed idyllic. Elise embraced her role as the perfect wife, hosting dinners for venture capitalists, smoothing over Victor's brusque demeanor, and championing his vision for a tech conglomerate that promised to revolutionize artificial intelligence. But as Victor's empire grew, so did the distance between them. Late nights at the office became entire weekends. Vacations were cancelled for board meetings. Elise, who had once been his partner in every sense, began to feel like an accessory, a beautiful fixture in his carefully staged life. When she announced her pregnancy, she hoped it would bridge the growing chasm. Victor's initial joy was palpable, but it faded quickly, replaced by a distracted restlessness that Elise couldn't decipher. Enter Serafina Voss, a woman whose presence seemed to shift the air around her. At 30, she was a vision of ethereal beauty, lithe, with cascading auburn hair and eyes that held a quiet intensity. She ran a boutique yoga studio in Soho, where Manhattan's elite flocked to her classes, drawn not just by her expertise but by the enigmatic aura she exuded. Serafina was not one to flaunt her lineage. In fact, few knew she was the sole heir to the Voss airline empire, a family fortune built on transatlantic routes and private jets. Her father, Reginald Voss, had been a titan in the aviation industry, but Serafina had distanced herself from the family name after a public falling out in her early 20s. She had chosen a life of simplicity, or so it appeared, teaching yoga, meditating in Bali, and cultivating a following that revered her as much for her philosophy as for her poise. Victor met Serafina at one of her classes, dragged there by a colleague who swore by her sessions for stress relief. From the first moment, he was entranced. Serafina's voice, calm and commanding, seemed to pierce through the noise of his world. Her teachings, rooted in mindfulness and detachment, resonated with a man who had begun to feel trapped by his own success. Their connection was immediate, electric. What began as private yoga sessions evolved into late-night conversations over green tea, then clandestine meetings in discreet hotels. Serafina, unlike Elise, challenged Victor's worldview. She spoke of freedom, of shedding the weight of materialism, of living authentically, ideas that both exhilarated and unsettled him. Elise, meanwhile, was blindsided. The news of Victor's affair came not from him but from a gossip column, a cruelly casual mention of tech mogul Victor Langston cozying up with a mysterious yoga guru. She confronted him in their penthouse, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. Victor, uncharacteristically cold, admitted to the affair and dropped the bombshell. He wanted a divorce. Elise, clutching her swollen belly, pleaded for them to work through it, for the sake of their unborn child. But Victor was resolute, his eyes devoid of the warmth she once knew. "I've changed," he said simply. "I need to be with someone who understands who I am now." The next day, he moved out, leaving Elise to navigate the wreckage of their life alone. The media frenzy was relentless. Tabloids painted Elise as the scorned wife, a tragic figure abandoned for a younger, more glamorous woman. Victor, ever the strategist, hired a crisis PR firm to spin the narrative, portraying himself as a man seeking personal growth. Serafina, however, remained an enigma. She declined interviews, her yoga studio issuing only a brief statement about respecting privacy. It wasn't until an investigative journalist dug into her past that the truth emerged. Serafina Voss was no mere yoga teacher. She was the heir to a $12 billion fortune, her family's airline empire spanning decades and continents. The revelation turned the scandal on its head. Suddenly, Victor wasn't just leaving his pregnant wife for a fling, he was aligning himself with a woman whose wealth and influence could elevate him to new heights. Elise, reeling from the betrayal, faced a public that oscillated between pity and judgment. Friends urged her to fight, to secure her financial future and that of her child. She hired a formidable divorce attorney, determined to protect her rights. The prenup she had signed years earlier, in a haze of love and trust, loomed large. It limited her claim to Victor's fortune, but her lawyer argued that the circumstances, his infidelity, her pregnancy, and the public humiliation, could sway a judge. Elise didn't want revenge, she wanted stability for her child. Yet the legal battle promised to be brutal, with Victor's team alleging that Elise had been emotionally distant, that their marriage was irreparably broken long before Serafina entered the picture. Serafina, for her part, seemed unfazed by the storm. She continued teaching her classes, her serene demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding her. Those close to her whispered that she had no interest in Victor's money or status. She had her own fortune, after all, locked away in trusts she rarely touched. Her attraction to Victor, they said, was rooted in his ambition, his hunger to redefine himself. But others speculated that Serafina was playing a longer game, using Victor to re-enter the world of high finance she had once rejected. Her family, still bitter over her estrangement, watched from afar, their silence speaking volumes. As the divorce proceedings began, the narrative grew more complex. Elise's supporters rallied on social media, branding Serafina a homewrecker and Victor a coward. Yet others saw Serafina as a woman who had simply fallen in love, her wealth and lineage irrelevant to her heart. Victor, caught between his old life and his new desires, found himself increasingly isolated. His board of directors questioned his judgment, and investors whispered about instability. The tech empire he had built was unshakable, but his reputation was not. For Elise, the path forward was fraught with pain but also resolve. She moved into a smaller apartment, surrounded by the nursery she had begun decorating. Friends and family closed ranks, offering support as she prepared for single motherhood. She began writing a blog, anonymous at first, about betrayal and resilience, pouring her heart into words that resonated with thousands. Through it all, she carried the weight of her unborn child, a reminder of both loss and hope. The scandal, like all scandals, would eventually fade, but its ripples would linger. Victor and Serafina's relationship, born in the heat of passion, faced its own tests. Could love thrive under such scrutiny? Elise, meanwhile, was rediscovering her strength, a woman forged in the fire of heartbreak. And in the shadows, the Voss family watched, their airline dynasty a silent player in a drama that was far from over. The saga of the millionaire's divorce from his pregnant wife for a yoga teacher, who turns out to be an airline dynasty heir, unfolds like a modern-day soap opera, dripping with scandal, betrayal, and the kind of plot twists that keep tabloids in business. In the first part of this tale, we explored the initial shockwaves, a wealthy businessman, let's call him James, blindsided his pregnant wife, Emma, with divorce papers, citing irreconcilable differences. The real bombshell, though, was his affair with Sophia, a yoga instructor whose serene demeanor and downward dog expertise masked her true identity as the heir to a multi-billion-dollar airline empire. Part 1 set the stage: James's ruthless ambition, Emma's heartbreak, and Sophia's enigmatic allure. Now, in Part 2, we dive deeper into the unraveling of secrets, the clash of egos, and the unexpected alliances that emerge as this love triangle spirals into a high-stakes game of power, money, and revenge. Emma sat in the sterile office of her lawyer, clutching a tissue that had long since disintegrated into a damp shred. Her pregnancy, now in its 7th month, was a constant reminder of the life she and James had planned, a life that now felt like a cruel mirage. The divorce filing had come out of nowhere, delivered by a courier on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The papers were cold and clinical, but the betrayal was visceral. James hadn't just left her, he'd left her for Sophia, the yoga teacher who'd been a fixture at their upscale wellness club. Emma had always found Sophia's calm, almost ethereal presence unsettling, but she'd chalked it up to her own insecurities. Now, the truth was undeniable: Sophia wasn't just a fling. She was the catalyst for the collapse of Emma's world. What Emma didn't know, what nobody knew until the tabloids got wind of it, was Sophia's true identity. She wasn't just a yoga instructor with a knack for mindfulness mantras. Sophia was the sole heir to the Caldwell Airline Dynasty, a family that had built a fortune on transatlantic flights and private jets for the ultra-elite. Her father, Richard Caldwell, had been a titan in the aviation industry, and after his death, Sophia inherited controlling shares in the company, worth billions. She'd kept her wealth under wraps, trading boardrooms for yoga studios, but her secret was out now, and it changed everything. James, for his part, thought he'd played his cards perfectly. He'd grown restless in his marriage to Emma, who, while loving and supportive, lacked the spark he craved. Sophia, with her lithe frame and whispered promises of spiritual enlightenment, was a breath of fresh air, or so he thought. Their affair began in the dim lighting of a private yoga session, where Sophia's gentle corrections to his warrior pose turned into lingering touches. By the time Emma was decorating a nursery, James was sneaking off to 5-star hotels with Sophia, convinced he'd found his soulmate. When Sophia casually mentioned her lineage one night over champagne, James's ambition kicked into overdrive. Marrying an airline heiress wasn't just a romantic upgrade, it was a business move that could catapult him into the stratosphere of global elites. But Sophia wasn't the pliable muse James imagined. Beneath her zen exterior was a woman who'd grown up navigating corporate sharks and family feuds. The Caldwell dynasty was no stranger to drama. Her father's 3 marriages and a bitter inheritance battle with her step-siblings had taught her to play the long game. Sophia didn't fall for James, she chose him. He was charming, yes, but more importantly, he was useful. His real estate empire, though modest compared to her family's wealth, had connections she could leverage to expand her influence in new markets. The yoga teacher persona was a carefully curated escape, a way to live authentically without the weight of her last name. James, however, saw her as a prize, and that was his first mistake. As the divorce proceedings ramped up, Emma found herself caught in a whirlwind of public scrutiny. The tabloids were merciless, painting her as the scorned, pregnant wife while Sophia was the glamorous seductress. Posts on X buzzed with speculation, some calling James a fool for leaving a devoted partner, others joking that Sophia's wealth made her the ultimate upgrade. One user quipped, trading a wife for an heiress. Bold move, but let's see if he can afford the baggage. Emma, humiliated, retreated from social media, but the online chatter only grew louder when Sophia's identity was revealed. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. This wasn't just a love triangle, it was a clash of titans. Emma's lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Rachel, saw an opportunity. She urged Emma to fight, not just for alimony but for a stake in James's business, which had flourished thanks to Emma's behind-the-scenes support. Emma had been the one managing their social calendar, charming investors at dinner parties, and even suggesting the eco-friendly branding that won James a lucrative contract with a green tech firm. Rachel argued that Emma deserved half of everything, including the penthouse, the vacation home in Aspen, and a share of James's company. But Emma wasn't driven by greed, she wanted justice. She wanted James to feel the sting of losing something he valued, just as she had. Meanwhile, Sophia was playing a game of her own. She'd agreed to marry James, but not out of love. Her family's airline was facing a PR crisis after a string of mechanical failures, and she needed a distraction. A high-profile engagement to a dashing millionaire would keep the media focused on her personal life, not her company's balance sheet. Plus, James's real estate portfolio could be a useful asset in her plan to diversify the Caldwell empire into luxury resorts. She fed James just enough flattery to keep him hooked, all while quietly maneuvering to protect her own interests. When he proposed, she accepted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, already drafting a prenup that would leave him with nothing if he stepped out of line. The courtroom became a battleground. Emma, bolstered by Rachel's fierce advocacy, presented a compelling case. She produced emails and text messages showing how she'd contributed to James's success, from brainstorming marketing campaigns to securing key introductions. She even revealed that James had used her family's connections to land his first major deal. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for fairness, seemed sympathetic. But James's legal team was ruthless, painting Emma as a gold digger who'd trapped him with a pregnancy. The accusation stung, especially since Emma had been the one pushing for a modest lifestyle, while James chased flashy cars and private club memberships. Sophia, meanwhile, stayed above the fray, attending court in tailored suits that screamed understated wealth. She played the role of the supportive fiancé, but her presence was a calculated move. Every time she appeared, the media ate it up, and the airline's stock ticked up slightly as investors bet on her stabilizing influence. Behind closed doors, though, she was growing irritated with James. His arrogance was starting to grate, and his assumption that he could control her was laughable. She began to see him as a liability, not an asset. When a private investigator hired by Emma uncovered evidence that James had been siphoning funds from his company to finance his lavish dates with Sophia, the tables turned. The revelation was a bombshell. Emma's team used it to argue that James was unfit to manage his own assets, let alone contest her claim to them. Sophia, sensing the tide shifting, distanced herself. She didn't need James's money, she had plenty of her own. But she didn't want her name dragged through the mud. She leaked a story to a friendly journalist, framing herself as a naive woman swept up by James's charm, unaware of his financial misdeeds. The article painted her as a victim, not a villain, and the public lapped it up. On X, users praised her classy response, with one writing, "Sophia's too smart to be anyone's trophy." James played himself. Emma, though, wasn't done. The financial scandal gave her leverage, but it also sparked an unexpected alliance. Sophia, realizing James was more trouble than he was worth, reached out to Emma through a mutual friend. The meeting was tense, held in a quiet cafe far from prying eyes. Sophia, dropping her yoga teacher serenity, was blunt. She didn't love James, and she didn't trust him. She proposed a deal. Emma could have the bulk of James's assets if Sophia could walk away with a clean reputation. In return, Sophia would provide evidence of James's financial misconduct, ensuring Emma's victory in court. Emma was torn. She hated Sophia for her role in the affair, but she saw the logic in the offer. Together, they could dismantle James's empire, leaving him with nothing but his regrets. It was a risky move, trusting the woman who'd stolen her husband, but Emma was tired of being the victim. She agreed, and the two women, once rivals, became uneasy allies. As the trial loomed, they worked in secret, pooling their resources to expose James's lies. For Emma, it was about reclaiming her dignity. For Sophia, it was about cutting a dead weight loose. The courtroom climax was electric. James, blindsided by the evidence, fumbled his defense. The judge ruled in Emma's favor, awarding her a substantial portion of James's wealth and full custody of their unborn child. Sophia, true to her word, emerged unscathed, her airline dynasty intact. James, humiliated, retreated to lick his wounds, his dreams of marrying into billions shattered. As Emma left the courthouse, her hand resting on her belly, she felt a flicker of hope. She'd lost a husband but gained something far more valuable, her strength. And in the shadows, Sophia watched, already planning her next move in a game only she understood.